Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today myself, Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp, and Hillary White come together to head to the theater and review 28 Years Later. This is a franchise and director we're all pretty big fans of, but unfortunately we're pretty mixed on the film. While some of us absolutely adore this film and think it's a modern masterpiece, some of us are rather cold on the feature also, and today we have that debate. We break down the societal context of the film, what is really being said here, and how the film works as the start of a new trilogy. Thank you so much for listening and watching the podcast. Now let's get to our review of 28 Years Later. Great, thank you both for joining me today to talk about 28 Years Later. Very excited to talk about this one. A pretty decent Danny Boyle fan, and also this is a franchise that while I might not necessarily have a lot of heart to, this is not one of my favorite franchises, I do think it's still a pretty solid one. So Jack, I'll turn it over to you first as our resident Brit. What are your opinions on 28 Years Later?
Well, I was just saying off air, I have quite a deep relationship with this film. It's strange because I'm glad Hillary's here, because when we did the Coppola Dracula film, Hillary said this really interesting story about seeing that film at a certain age where being too young, or perhaps just finding it at a certain age where you maybe formulating like what it really is about, and the sexual stuff about it and the violence. And I remember we had this on video. My parents are not horror fans. I remember they were out one day and I was quite young. I must have been like maybe 8, 9, maybe even 10. It might have been a little bit older. But I remember putting it on like VHS or maybe early DVD. I can't remember. And watching it. And watching the opening, the first one, 20 years later, with the chimpanzees. Watched it all the way throughout. I was like scarred for life, to a point where, and I don't mind saying this, I probably actively wouldn't watch horror for 20 years because of it. It hit me that deep. And that film still to this day resonates to a point where I find it quite repelling to a degree where I think it's so good at its job, especially being in London. And you know, at that time you've got like chemical warfare all in the news in the UK, the 2003, 2004, like with Kuwait and Iraq, and 9/11's happened. That type of media is like, it's when you were a kid, you're growing into it. It's all you're seeing on the radio, and your parents are worried about it. I remember just hitting to a point where I was like, this is actively distressing. And I remember, I remember watching 28 Weeks Later and having sort of the same issue with it, but I'll get onto that a little bit later. So when you were like, "Oh, we're going to do this," I'm not going to lie, I've been quite worried about this film, because we've had that chat about Saw X, and I had a visceral. I'm laughing because it actually makes me feel tense this moment. But I had a reaction where there's someone who cuts a leg off in that film. It's not really a spoiler, but come on, it's Saw X. And I remember I was like, I think I'm going to puke, and that does not happen to me. I was like, I need to go to the toilet. And I remember just sat there thinking, I'm going to be sick in front of all these people. And I was like, I'm just so worried that I'm going to have a reaction like this. And the worst thing about it is, this film has been following me. I'll be very brief here, but just for the added context where I'm going to go here. When I was working in Newcastle about 5, 6, 7 months ago, they were casting up there. They shot in Gateshead. There's a scene here where there's Angel of the North in bronze. I used to drive past that going to work and coming home from it. So that's quite grim. And also, the job I'm working at now, I shit you not, everyone who's listening to this, I swear to God, this is true. When I'm leaving work now, I'm working in Leeds, which is 200 miles away from where they were shooting there. They were shooting the sequel at an abandoned swimming pool, which I thought was going to be in this, but it's not. It's near the Costas film. Richard Dunn's leisure centre swimming pool. They were shooting the sequel there. So every time I would drive home, you'd see this massive crane and all these cars like from 30, 40 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, this is following me. So here we are now. With 28 years later, Danny Boyle returns, Alex Garland of Warfare and Civil War, which I've got a strange relationship with him as well. Look, this is not the film, and this is going to be an overall reaction that I thought it was going to be, and I'm better off for that. Going into this thinking it was scary, perhaps I made this up in my own mind and I was pushing it up to a degree where it doesn't really reveal itself as such. This does have very scary moments. But this isn't scary. This is frightening on a different thematic level. And being from England, and this being incredibly polarizing in terms of the political nature, and granted, I know that you two are both from the US and stuff happening over there now is it's in the Western world, but with the UK being an island the way it is, it's very strange with the Brexit rules and how it others people. So I can't wait to talk to you two about that, especially when there's this film. But it wasn't scary per se, but this was absolutely frightening. I had a lot of fun here. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about the use of score, which I think is a strange subject. The use of aesthetic, especially with its use of an iPhone 15 Pro Max, we'll get there. But I thought this was to be electrifying. I thought it was incredibly engaging, immersive, again frightening. Not necessarily new ground until the second act, where these two, the creatives Garland and Boyle, really double down. And not to bring up the Wachowskis every other week, Carson, I'm sorry for the bingo out there, but it felt like an active disassociation with the act that's gone before to an audience's expectation. We're going to give you something that you've seen before. We're going to give you the cocoon of it, but inside there's something else. It's not going to be the butterfly. It's going to be something completely different. With as weak analogy as that is, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. There's a lot to discuss here as a Brit, and I'm so interested in what you two are going to say as being Americans over the pond. But for the most part, I thought this was excellent. Not outstanding, but I thought this was excellent. And for a British horror like Ennis Man and Mark Jenkins stuff recently, and you've got the Wicker Man, it really goes back to its roots. So I thought it was excellent. But I'll push back to you two. But I thought it was thrilling, really entertaining for what it was.
Hillary, what did you think?
I'm not entirely sure where to start, but I will say that I had a similar experience to Jack. It was not what I thought it was going to be. And because of that, I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting, because I get like backpedal and I was like, what did I think this was? And I think I expected something a bit more straightforward. But there were elements of this film that I liked, and then there were elements of this film I didn't like. So very much for me, it ended up being a mixed bag. And I ended up very much stuck in the middle, where I felt there may have been, it seemed like there were two different films in here that were kind of fighting it out. And one is a little bit more contemplative and more about the human experience, about what happens to people after society breaks down decades later and what they are turning into. And then, of course, the elements of, being chased by zombies, being attacked by zombies, getting infected, the spread of infection, and all of that sort of thing. So it seemed like there was like this really like bloody, kinetic, rapidly edited, zombie kill film. And then there was also this more contemplative, slow study of death and the meaning of death, how to handle grief, cult dynamics, because maybe I'm getting into this too early, but I went and saw with a friend and he said, oh, well, there's a cult there's like cults on the horizon, obviously. And I said, the island was a cult too. And he thought about it and he said, yeah, actually, you're right. No, that was a cult. So cults, extremism, all that sort of stuff, which doesn't only exist in Britain, obviously, it exists everywhere. And it was, I think, those things that kind of pulled at me more. A lot more things going on with the Ralph Fiennes character, a lot more going on with the island, which is fascinating to me, exactly how that works and what exactly is happening. I already have theories about certain things that happen in the film that didn't seem right to me, where I thought there's probably more to this than the audience knows. So just, in a nutshell, my opening remarks on this was it's very interesting. I can't say it's a bad film, but I think that I really felt pushed and pulled in two different directions, so I wasn't able to make my mind. So maybe you will be the tiebreaker, Carson?
So I was quite worried about this film. I feel like the one part of this feature nobody was talking about, and all the hype, all the excitement, obviously the trailer did like banger numbers. Everyone was excited. No one was talking about that this is film 1 of a trilogy, and I was very, very worried about that projection. Film 2 is like ready to go, coming out next January. We'll get there when we get there. Part 3 is in development. Danny Boyle's like at CinemaCon, like begging his investors for money, like on stage, being like, please, I just need to make this third one and finish the story. I was quite worried about how this film would handle itself, being part 1 of a trilogy. And I think I'm very more similar to Hillary here than Jack, I would say. Definitely very mixed on the project. There's a lot here to enjoy. I think the filmmaking here is wonderful. I love the upgraded digital filmmaking, some gorgeous, gorgeous scenery and shots throughout here. Shout out Alfie Williams in a really, really captivating, I thought, child performance. I think probably one of the strongest arcs of the film is him really coming to his own. At the beginning of the film, you see his ritual of going through this to become a man. And I think like his character develops very nicely throughout this film, taking more ownership and taking more agency. There's a lot here. The world building here is like double fold, because while there are a lot of interesting politics, and that's always been my favorite part of this series, I don't think that's a hot take to say. I appreciate how this film has reflected society. And quite frankly, each film before this, even though I'm much higher on the first film than the second film, they've all been really like ahead of their time, really, when you look at the politics and how society has developed and evolved even to this day. That is still present enough here where you have, again, you talk about cults, Hillary. Very funny. We're talking about this right after talking about Midsommar, which also dealt with cults. And there's a lot here about separation and it's all there. I just found the world building here overall to be very, very frustrating for me. In the sense that I think it really jumps the shark, but it doesn't. I mean, you mentioned the iPhone, Jack. We'll get there. I found it to be a stretch in a lot of ways with world building, where it felt like it really wanted this extreme world to play with, but it was never willing to make that full jump. And it just felt to me very, very frustrating trying to understand the dynamics here. And it felt very like on a time level that it's only been 28 years and you already have this entire society with these rituals. I found it really hard to lose myself within this film. I also think it just feels very prequel-y. It feels very like this could have been act 1 of a film. There's a meaningful conversation here in the third act about death. And I actually would say I'm probably a bigger fan of the second half of this film than the first half, which I think is a hot take from what I've seen online. But for me, it just felt like this film really lacked scope. It really lacked substance. It really felt like it was setting up this world for what will be explored in later films. Not in a way that I think is like horrendous. I think there's definitely been worse examples of this. If you watch like Across the Spider-Verse, I think that's like much, much more detrimental to that viewing experience than this film. But I definitely was a little bit cold here. I definitely was like, I feel like we probably could have taken these 3 films and reduced them to 1 or 2 films. But I haven't seen, of course, what they're going to do. But I was definitely more mixed here.
It's interesting. In my opening thing, I forgot to mention, I didn't want to go on forever, but I've sort of done a deep dive with this. So I watched, you actually managed to get me to watch the original like yesterday evening when I was like literally in a fever dream. I was like, this is going to kill me or I'm going to survive this either way. And but the last week at work, I've read the 28 Days Later comic book, which is a sequel to the original, but it's like a sequel, then it runs concurrently with the 28 Weeks Later about Selena, which I thought was interesting. And I read 28 Days Later, The Aftermath, a prequel novel, after a graphic novel. And then I read the Fangoria magazine in 2002 about it. So I feel like I've been sort of preparing myself for... one thing that's quite immediately clear about the 3 films, though, is that the two originals and the comic books is that there are zombie films with human characters in it, and the human characters are a byproduct of it. And with 28 Weeks Later, it sort of pushes it a little bit more to get more character driven. But then the graphic novels just do the same thing. It's the same Selena or the characters presented with the outbreak. What do they do with it? They have to kill someone they know, and then they try to survive. You get right to the end, and then there's another outbreak. Okay, this one is an active, different participant where it's a character-driven film that happens to have zombies in it. And sort of in a world where everything's so saturated now and so derivative, and we've done so many horrors on this, and watching horror very recently, a lot of it blurs, and I think this is a distinctive difference in just trying to make something. And I think what Hillary's on about is completely valid. I think you said as well, Carson. There are two tonal differentiations here, and I think one is Danny Boyle and the other one's Alex Garland. And we had that chat about Tom Cruise and McHugh about like two issues, creative choices here. I can understand why Garland would come back to this, because he just likes to look at this world and see what the characters present with. Annihilation is one, Civil War, something has happened. I want my characters to respond to it, and I want to see what happens. That's Alex Garland. The Beach is a primary example. Boyle's a bit different. I think Boyle wants to now go. He's done that with Trainspotting too, and I think Danny Boyle, to very briefly just counter the iPhone thing, which we will get there because there's some creative choices there. I think that's where he comes into it, thinking, I've done this. I did the DTV aesthetic in the original. Why don't we do that again? But I'll evolve it, just like the evolution of the film in itself and the thematics, the actual narrative. And I think that's where it comes down to it. There's a lot of like brazen choices here. But I did want to mention before I hand it over about the cult thing. And this is not. I don't want to mansplain. Anyone who goes on the line can see this. But the UK, since the Brexit debacle, has just segregated itself in a way that the US is built on states. I can't believe I'm like explaining this to Americans. I don't mean this anywhere. I don't want to talk down to anyone, but essentially, like the states run themselves in a way. But you get voted politically on the electoral college. The popular vote's one thing, but that's how you win the presidential. That's how you win the politic race. In the UK, it's a little bit different. When we have a general election, you go on constituencies, which is like small towns. And what happens is that small towns up north and down south deal with trade, deal with number 10 or the government rule very, very differently. And Brexit was very much like in the Midwest in the US, like Michigan, the Dakotas and stuff like that, Minnesota. You've got a lot of blue-collar working class people up north who often feel neglected and rejected by it. I'm getting somewhere with this, by the way, audience. Don't worry, I'm not going on a fucking Rory Stewart rant or anything like that. But essentially, a lot of people were fed the idea of immigration in this country is destroying jobs and livelihoods. So those people were sort of voted for a reform change, which is happening now under Nigel Farage, which is like almost like the Third Reich. But again, that's complaining about that to Americans. So apologies right there. But essentially, that it's broken down to not necessarily cultist behaviour, but almost like othering anybody who isn't from that local town, and it happens everywhere. I'm from up north, so you speak to like George Lewis or Rory or Jakob, for example, who live in England. They'll all have different accents, but they'd live down south, whereas I'm from the middle of essentially just a little bit above the north of England. If I go to Newcastle, I'm still othered because I just don't have that. They have like a very organic. I'm looking off the Geordie stuff in here, setting these two Newcastle characters with Jamie and Isla. It's very interesting how difficult to unpack and to absorb other people. And I think this film, 100%, is trying to evoke that sentiment of that you might be a human being, but you don't sound like me. And it's interesting how that plays with certain characters, such as Ralph Fiennes' character. There's always this predetermined or pre-evaluated opinion of people because of their actions, and there's no investigation to identify that or look at to have that discussion. There's a very pivotal sequence here where three characters oversee someone do something, and to the untrained eye, it perhaps does look what is going on here. It evokes quite difficult Holocaust imagery, and then you find out that on a twist of when someone who's very naive or ignorant goes to a position of, there's a power dynamic. It's sort of softened and explained, and it's a really interesting aspect to what English life is not really like. We other people, and we're such a multicultural industry, multicultural people. This film absolutely 100% gets that. The thing at the end we'll probably have to discuss, because I think that gets lost on Americans, and I think in the UK that's going to have major ramifications for what this trilogy is about. But I just think that the cult aspect of it is ultimately people segregating themselves. I think it just really works. It's quite haunting being in a British society, knowing that after two major outbreaks here, and like Hillary, I didn't actually realise that, God, where they're from on Holy Island, like they're still living in 2002. The Queen's on the board, like they're having a 12-year-old boy having like what, and when it says nothing has changed, I don't think it's necessarily about the outbreak. It's about like the sentiment of what are you doing? We're going off and killing these people as a rite of passage. These, they're not zombies; they're just ill humans, as described by Gal, which I think is really incredible to have that discussion. They are like, again, Romero tried to do it in Day of the Dead, but I just thought it was a very fascinating thing about townsfolk and the Wicker Man. And where I'm from, we have a thing called rush bearing, which is so weird to describe to anyone who's not from here. But they go around and have a parade with crops. To what extent, I do not know, but they do it, and it's a massive celebration, and it's just, what would that be like in 30 years after with what happened with COVID? It's a fascinating. Yeah. But I know I'm waffling here, but I really the cult thing about being in a small town, like that hits me like even harder to an extent where that's going to just brood to a point where there's going to be a lot of subliminal issues in my life about that, I'm sure. But I'll throw it back to either you two about any other comments.
See, I think a comparison I would make that I kept coming to and trying to understand why I see that, but why I didn't feel that, and mark off another bingo card, everyone. I thought about a lot The Village, M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. In some ways a similar setting, and when you really break it down, similar idea of these people choosing to exclude themselves from humanity, choosing to live based off their own morals in their own way, how they want to, and isolate themselves. I think for me, there was two elements I thought were somewhat disappointing. And in both situations, there is a member of this community who is sick, who is needing treatment, needing help. In The Village, I found it just be so much more engaging, having that conversation push and having that conversation of what do we do? Do we seek outside help? What do we do? I found that to be quite lackluster in comparison in 28 years later. I also think when there are zombies, basically, for lack of better words, actively out there trying to kill you, it's just the risk feels so great that for me it just feels so it feels a little bit fictionalized. I think it would have worked so much better had the entire world just been infected and been zombies. Like I think that when you establish that people are just outside living their lives on the other side of the sea completely normally, the jump in logic of I understand like wanting to live life a certain way. I get that. I understand that. It just feels like it jumps the shark for me in a way where my brain really struggles to buy into that world. I don't know. Maybe I'm alone in that, though. Hillary, did you have any thoughts?
Yes, I was struggling to unmute myself. For some reason, my hands were not moving fast enough. I think 5 years ago, when I first started appearing on these podcasts, I don't remember what episode it was, but at one point I think I was asking particularly of people who, are based in other countries, the UK, Italy, all these different places, is the way that cults are perceived, because in the US they're so rampant, they're everywhere. So I think at one point I did ask, and I think Jack was on that episode. I think maybe you were too, and I really can't remember the answer, but it's just like, is this like an American phenomenon, like as far as like things spreading that quickly, or that there's just so many of them you can't even keep track? And of course it has ties to the religious history of America, which we definitely won't get into. There's just not enough time. But I think, of course, like Jack just name checked The Wicker Man. That's a very notable piece of, British film that confronts, cult behavior in England. It exists everywhere, of course. I think my question just kind of addressed like, how rampant is it? Like, is it happening there all the time? Because just wow, it just seems to never stop here. And now it seems like just, as a whole, there is like a cult that's kind of running things right now. But I mean, as far as like, I think the cult stuff, it is interesting to go back to what Jack was saying about like that disparity between the two halves. And Carson, you pointed it out as well, which is one part is Danny Boyle, one part is Alex Garland. I wanted to chime in, but I don't like to talk over people where I just thought, absolutely. And I think, strangely enough, the parts that I suspect are Garland's are the ones that I am drawn to more than Boyle's. Because I think Boyle was, the way I perceived it, and I could be wrong, maybe it's a flip flop, is that Danny Boyle's more about the zombies and the kills and the spread of infection, that sort of thing being established. I think Garland is asking like more existential questions about how humans behave and death and how things are perceived. I think that what Jack is addressing is how Dr. Kelson, it is Dr. Kelson, I just want to double check that, how he's perceived, because the moment they show that flashback on the hill, I knew exactly what he was doing. I could see why it was scary, but the way that no one lays out bodies like that, I immediately thought like, this is just someone who's burying the dead. This is someone who's respecting the dead. That's how I saw it. But of course, that particular group of people and the way that they perceive life and how they're going about things is completely different. And that ties into what we're experiencing now and what the films are about. Like Jack, I didn't read the in-between literature that's been released between the films, but I did revisit the first one and the second one in preparation for this. And the first one was so mind-blowing. The moment it starts, you start seeing news footage of people beating each other, of people like beating a hanged body, people getting, attacked by police and riots and stuff. And my first reaction was, oh, so this is pretty much right now. It seems like footage that we could be watching on social media right now. It's the same thing. And that's the core of the rage that ends up feeding into the narrative, but they use real footage at the beginning. And of course, it pulls back, you see the monkey, and then all of that, goes completely haywire. All of this because of experiments on apes. So, you know what? I'm just going to pass the baton. I think that's all I have to say at this moment.
I'll say one thing as well about the Garland thing, because I completely agree with that. I think Boyle is the cinematic aspect, and I think Garland is more the thematic. Where I think Garland it's like Annihilation. There's questions there that are incredibly like highbrow, and then there's a lot more personal ones. And I think for an audience going into sci-fi, I think those questions of just the bigger picture. What's going to happen? What are we? I think Garland sort of like has this extraordinary question mark and all that. And I think there's a lot here about that. It's not about just what's happening on the landscape. It's about an evolution of a virus, the evolution of mankind, the evolution of community. There's questions about death, about life, what's worth living, about trauma. How are communities based 28 years of being scarred as kids mentally? How are they dealing with things? But the one thing that the franchise sort of like repeatedly goes to is the idea of the juxtaposition between, well, not even that, but sort of the mirroring between the rage of its infected and the rage of the humans. And the best part of indication of it on a visceral but also a visual level is Cillian Murphy's final act in the 28 Days Later, where he just becomes one of them, has to achieve survival. And I think it's an interesting one of the, throughout that film, just waking up, how quickly he has to descend into madness, but also retaining some sort of human element. What's that going to be like 26 years later? Because we're going to see this, but because I think that there's a really interesting question here about how the rage has affected humans, and it's throughout the before Alfie makes his decision about going to the mainland, just at the start of the second act. there's a lot of build-up of tension where it becomes like he almost has his bar mitzvah. Like there's like a visual cues of that, and he becomes essentially a man, but he hasn't owned it, hasn't deserved it in his own right. And you see, like his father, Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, is like he hits him, and he just the build the ridge. He goes up to the room. He's smashing on the door head like that. He puts 2 holes in it, and when he's got the knife and like he's shaking, and he puts it back and gives it to his son, or like a sequence with Jodie Comer's Isla, where she's protecting Alpha in the second act. Like there are moments of just absolute horrifying rage from the humans that there's no differential between the two. I think that's what Garland wants to approach it, and I think that's ultimately what's going to be the story here, is that it's the humans now invading England, the mainland, and it's humans interacting with their pool and then affecting how they're going to live their lives. It's like there's a very pivotal moment where the Alfie and his dad are killing these slow mo zombies in the beginning, and they see something, and it's like a young girl version of it, and it runs away, and it's like a blink and you miss it, and it goes on. But that's also a retread of something happens a bit later, which I'm sure we'll get into. And it's like, what's the difference between the beginning with Jimmy, where they're in a house with the parents and something enters there and kills them? There's a really interesting mirroring of events where we should feel emotionally invested in one but not see the idea of the other. And I think that's all political. I think that's a post 9/11 mentality that Garland's definitely want to explore, that you can't destroy something and not expect, or you can't mess with something and expect repercussions on both sides. And I think here, like when you're trying to play God and the rules are reversed and things change, and then you're the invader and they take something, what do you expect that's going to have to be repercussions? I think that's the overall arc. That'll be, like you said, Carson, 2's in the can, it's done. The third one, I think it was meant to shoot in March, which is slightly worrying that now we're in July, or almost in August. So that's going to be a question mark. But the early reviews of this and the box office, it's the weakest out of the 3, but still, it's going to make some good money. So I think that's going to be the overall arc. It's just going to be the opposing themes. But it's an interesting one. I think that's what you're right, Hillary, about. When you walk into this, I do think it's going to be mixed, because if you're going to watch the first one, then it's the worst thing you can do watching the Danny Boyle film, because it's just sort of a visceral aesthetic there, where it's just so angry and nasty and raw and visceral on multiple levels. And then you watch the second one, and it's like, oh, okay, we're doing this, and then it's this, and it's just so a total detachment of it. But I quite like that. I quite like that it does feel like it's been 28 years. Well, it's been more than that, hasn't it? But it feels like it's been 28 years in real time, where things have evolved to a point where it is just not touchable anymore. The texture here, it's just totally different. I quite like that. I quite like its approach.
I agree with that. I mean, I feel like with Garland, it's really difficult with his recent filmography. Granted, I have not seen Warfare, so I don't know how that one delivers. But I feel like between men, especially, I feel like there's a lot of Civil War within this DNA, with what he was trying to explore with Civil War and just how he views modern society and how that moves in waves and ebbs and flows. I feel like he is a writer right now that, for me at least, has the ability to circle really interesting ideas without hitting the nail on the head. Very curious to see how those narratives and stories develop throughout this series, for sure. But for me, I feel like, again, I think that's been one of the core beauties of this franchise. The first one, exploring how rage, I mean, again, way before even social media, now with social media, it's a huge thing, how that rage spreads and how that destroys and collapses a society. With 28 Weeks Later, exploring a government's response, where they're literally murdering innocent people. I did watch both of those right before this, which maybe was a weird move, all things considered. This just felt like the first one that, for me, never had that scene. It never had that moment to where it really, for me, captivated that conversation. And I feel like that does come down to Garland. I think Hillary, that was a really strong drawing the line in the sand between the two filmmakers. I don't know if that found its groove for me between their two visions.
You have a point there. And yeah, I think that we're on the same page as far as, very two different outlooks or styles, melding together. One thing that I've had to think about is how long Garland has been with me. And I think that goes back to The Beach, which I would also recommend as a book. I'd say read the book. And I did like The Tesseract as well. That was his second novel. I don't remember it as much, but it was an interesting exploration of different people going through different things in the Philippines. And I won't get into that too much because this is about 28 years later. But he's been around for 20 something years. And I mean, like Jack said at the beginning, my experience is different because I'm a bit older. So I did see 28 Days Later, the first one in the theater, and it was a very visceral experience. And of course, the way things were at the time is that you had some trailers and stuff like that, and we knew who the filmmaker was. I went with a few friends, like we liked Train Spotting, and we knew Danny Boyle was. Cillian Murphy was nobody. Nobody knew who he was. This was his breakthrough film, and for a while we didn't even know how to pronounce his name. We were like, is it Cillian? Or is like we were totally clueless. There was like no information about this man whatsoever. And so we went into it kind of blind and had a very memorable and enjoyable experience. Enjoyable might not be the right word, but as far as like coming out and thing and telling people that's definitely worth seeing in the theater, go and see it. But what Garland has done in the time since, I can't say that I'm completely devoted to him to the point where it's like everything he makes is brilliant. He's not, one of my favorite directors of all time, but he brings really intriguing things to the screen that, foster conversations like the one that we're having or completely alienate or upset people. That kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, even Warfare to a certain extent has elicited some probably very uncomfortable conversations between people about whether it's war propaganda or whether it's examining something deeper. I think that I'm more in the latter camp, but I had some issues with Warfare myself. But there's one thing, I'm kind of like pivoting here, but there's one thing I wanted to address, which was the scene that Jack brought up about the momentum of the first act is very much about Jamie bringing his son to the mainland, teaching him how to hunt, and everything about it is wrong. Like everything about it from the very beginning. I'm like, he's 12. He's obviously not ready. You're not listening to anything that anyone is saying. Like immediately the character of Jamie, there was so many problems. The way that he behaves once they're on the mainland to the point where they get to the house and there's a guy hanging there. And I thought to myself, really? There's a guy that just happens to be hanging in this house. And I couldn't help but think someone put him there. It could be someone from the island for all we know that they wanted to get rid of, and we're using him as target practice. And all of that goes to say, that it's about making his son a man, and it's a disaster. They run out of arrows. I was so mad at I was so mad at Jamie. He's like, oh, we're out of arrows. And it's just like, you're so stupid. Like, you didn't recover any of the arrows from the slow corpses or anything. Just didn't plan. And then once they get back to the mainland, like he's bragging about how awesome his son was and stuff. And it's all lies. His son doesn't become a man until that confrontation outside of his mother's bedroom, where for me, the thought that entered my mind is like, oh, this is like, he is the man of the house now, where there's someone who's done damage to him, done damage to his mother. He's dishonest. He's obviously corrupt in some sort of way. And he says, get away from us. That's when he became a man. And it's moments like that that make it more interesting to me than, I don't know. I think they were trying something new with the editing. Like I bet some people they love the kill shots where they're like showing people's heads exploding from multiple angles and stuff. People probably thought that was sick and amazing. And no, like I'm not trying to, put you down or anything like that. That's what some people go to see is like people's heads exploding. Fine. that didn't do it for me. But moments like that, where it's like you basically have to, like, to be 12 and confront your dad about adultery and being a shithead, and getting hit, and then also like defending your mother with a weapon. You know, that's to me is way more intriguing.
Well, the biggest clue to that as well about that journey is the aesthetic, because it's I think it's quite subliminal, but it does, when you get towards the end, which I won't spoil, but I hope we do get into it. There's sort of like a last 7 minutes where there's sort of this very much heightened reality that happens with certain things that happen you sort of realize, like, hang on a second, that's totally thematically opposing to what we've seen. And once you realize actually this whole film is about Alfie's oh my god, what's his name now? Is it the actor's name? I can't remember.
It's Alfie Williams, so you got it right. But Archie's
That's
a pretty British name too, so I guess, you know.
But yeah, I think this film's all about growth, and I think the family dynamic, him and his father, I find really interesting. Perhaps because I'm Northern as well, I find it quite immersive. But I agree with you that relationship is haunting to watch, and that's one of the sentiments I look at when you read the tagline. Nothing has changed. Like, time has not changed anything. You think about Jamie as a character, right? Jamie has survived 2 outbreaks, lives in a compound with his wife, who has survived, who's not very well, and a boy who's grown to a point where he's becoming a man. Jamie has it all compared to other people on the island who probably don't. They've probably lived through absolute terror and seen the other side of it. There's not many people in this world can say that, and yet it's still not good enough. He still needs to push his son to be something he probably doesn't need to be just yet. He ostracized his wife because she's ill. He's doing other things behind his back. He can't. He sort of has no maturity compared to where he's trying to instill that into his son. And I think that sentiment, I know I keep on saying that word, but I do feel that thematic, that arc about it, just nothing has changed. Like, there's still these silly people who have not sort of realised how good they've got it, and they're still pushing the boat. And even though this group has rules and strangely hasn't broken it, you know, you look at this character, this young kid, and the choices he makes. They're not right decisions. Like, I think that's what Carson was about. Like, they don't make any sense. But this kid's 12 or 13, 14, trying to act like he's 23, who's got absolutely no life skills. The kid's setting fires in the middle of nowhere, sleeping in the open with someone who's not very well. He's breaking all the rules. He's not listening to his father, who's trying to give him advice about how to properly defend himself. He's not taking the second watch when they're in that little building. He doesn't seem to acknowledge anything, and especially all that is brewing to something, and it's that final last 7 minutes. That kid does not know someone of authority. He goes up to that guy, Ray finds his character. He doesn't know him. We've been told it. Obviously, that's a twist in itself, which I think is actually subverted to the audience expectation. I think it works. But within that character's lore, that arc, we've seen throughout these films, you don't do that. You don't in this genre. You don't go and interact with people like that. You know, 30 years these people, 28 years these people have been isolated on this island, 2 outbreaks, and they're making the same mistakes. There's no maturity there. And when you get to the end, where I'm not going to spoil that, when you get to the end and he's made certain choices, I think that's the revelation about his father realizing, I fucked up here. We've made big decisions. Like, what is he doing? What is he doing? And I think that relationship that's going to go forward with someone else is going to be the big one, because this kid doesn't know what a role model is. You know, he's seen his father lie in front of his face, do other things. I think that going forward, again, the character-driven arc of what this film presented in the second and third one, how they're going to fit other things in that, like Hillary said earlier, it's going to be quite difficult, because ultimately you're going to have a character-driven piece set in this world. You know, you're going to lose the audience about who wanted to watch 28 Days Later Part 2 of this, and you didn't get it. And with how this ends, it's going to go in another different direction. I think it's going to alienate quite a few audiences. So it's going to have to, I don't know if anyone's read about like this doesn't have the same cinematographer, editor, score, not the same composer, different director for the sequel, which is not a bad thing because all those people in their own craft are quite skilled. Hell or High Water, 12 Years a Slave, that's the cinematographer. But how can you have this and the next one together, follow a narrative arc, and then make creative choices? It just seems like you're going to watch another very wacky film. And to me, someone mentioned like it's Empire Strikes Back. Like, no. I think the second one's going to be The Last Jedi. I think you're going to get an audience or not. I have no emotional investment with these characters to this larger world. These are not like legacy characters or anything like that. So this film gets away with it because it's brand new. It feels fresh. How are they going to introduce legacy characters in the sequels? To me, I'm sort of like, you're going to have to be very careful because you're gonna though they shouldn't really bring anyone else back. This world's big enough to just explore the nuance of just a father and son and have the character arc of that. I'll be very interested, but I'll be surprised how they land that. But there's risks here. There's narrative. I think the aesthetic, like you said, they'll get back to point. Through the eyes of a child, both of these sequences at the beginning with a young Jimmy in Scotland, I think is like a kid who's just losing the plot, and it's like just what he's seeing through his eyes. And what happens with Alfie? I think you said it again. What happens with the young kid's character? I can't remember his name, but the aesthetic changes as he sees this world. That heightened reality that Hillary mentioned, it sort of goes a bit mute, especially when you get to where we meet Ray Fiennes' character. Like that, you just get like a normal viewpoint there, like of what that scenario, the action sequence is. You don't get the big, hyperactive edits and cuts. And I think it's him when he seems to hit a level of like seriousness and maturity, all that fades away and the reality comes back. But when he's in a situation of like, not like he's mollycoddled or like he's being protected. Well, yeah, essentially when he's being protected, that heightened reality of like the action game comes on, like, because he doesn't know any better. He doesn't know the severity of it all. And I think with the Power Ranger stuff, how that bookends the film, I think is really, really interesting and really good. I quite like the aesthetic. It's a risk. I mean, it played really well in the cinema, although it did feel like very dense. I don't know if you two realise this. It felt like very squared off on occasion because you don't have that really wonderful, really wide lens. Although, granted, they've used some really professional high-end stuff. There's a few really beautiful sequences that echo like a dissonance between what we're seeing visually, and you see like these beautiful fields of flowers blossoming in a world of depravity, and then you see serious violence, and then you see moments of like genuine dumbfounded yet like outlandish moments where like, what is going on here? A notable train sequence, and then you have something where all of that gets cuts away, and it's like, oh wow, like we're having a bit of brevity here. Like we're having like this really wonderful moment of someone having their own decision aside from being taken away. I just think that it's a very powerful type of feature. Did you two choke up at that sequence at the Bone Temple?
No, but I don't cry at films very often. It just doesn't
Hillary,
happen.
no.
It's true. I don't know why that happens. Honestly, that's something I should probably discuss with a therapist more than like on a podcast. No. I could explain why, but it'd be its own episode. But as far as what happens with Isla, his mother, all of that made sense to me. I know it's quite bleak. I said a similar thing with like all the dead bodies lined up. And to be clear, like I haven't worked in a cemetery. I haven't lived in a place where there's like huge war crimes going on, obviously. And hopefully I never will, crossing my fingers. But there is something about that extreme end of human nature that for some reason I think I tend to understand a little bit more, and I can't completely account for why, but making an end of life decision that, I mean, mostly got out of control due to neglect. The fact that, nobody was really doing anything to treat her or being honest with her son about it. It was handled very well. And I think that Ray Fiennes' character, I looked it up just to be sure, it is Dr. Kelson. His position in the story is a respite for me. excuse me, because I think I need in every story, there has to be good people, there has to be knowledgeable people, there has to be survivors, smart people that you can keep in mind and see qualities that you would want to have yourself in a very dire situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he very much was that for me. And the fact that he is a doctor and knows what he's doing, and you know that he, I know I think we're past the point of no return. That we're venturing into spoiler territory. That
Can I mention? Sorry,
yes.
I just want to mention one thing after you finish. Please, I didn't interrupt us before you finish. I wanted to mention, but go on. Sorry, Hillary.
Oh yes. The way that Isla departs. And what I think
Yeah.
for me, the core of the film is when he talks very gently to Spike while he's under the influence of, I think it's like a morphine plant
Mm-hmm.
medicine concoction that he's come up with. And he says, everyone dies if someone can die peacefully and with love. That is the ideal thing you can attain in this world. And you know that whatever happened, it isn't shown, that it's very humane. And it kind of transcends the film. It's probably the only thing I can think of in these three films so far where there's mercy and something actually very good. And even him like placing the skull up there and everything. I think I was thinking everyone in the theater's crying right now when he has to ascend that huge pyramid of skulls and he puts the skull up there. I thought, yeah, everyone here is crying because there was like young people in there. They were being loud at the beginning and, talking over the first few scenes of the film, and I was like, oh, here we go, and they're munching popcorn really loudly, and by the time of that film, like, you could hear a pin drop, and I was like, it did it. They're all crying.
I mean, I think everything with Alfie, I'll just say, like, worked completely. I think that's the strongest part of the film. Not just is it humane for his mother in that sense, and also just every choice. Like, yes, it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense because it's a kid, as you mentioned, Jack. But he also has a moment to grieve and accept and have that involvement in a way where, like, if she just died at home, I don't think he would necessarily have that level of being able to process. It was a very, very emotionally beautiful scene. I wasn't crying. Again, I think this is more about me than the film, but I thought that really quite worked.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you were like, it kind of goes back to another episode we were talking about, like, it was The Boy and the Heron, about how you should treat children. That was an excellent example of how an adult should treat a child in a horrible situation like that. I really hope that anyone who hears this episode keeps that in mind, as far as like being honest with children about death and having them take their own role in it in a way that's actually healing and they have like some autonomy in it, is probably the best you could do.
And masculinity. It's interesting seeing how masculinity differs between that situation and where he is raised and what they're trying to push for him as a man. And then obviously you get a lot of connotations with emotions for that. I mean, having him have the emotional intelligence in that scene, I think is very meaningful. But what were you going to say, Jack?
I'm going to sound like a really morbid bastard when I say this, but within where this is going, that situation where he meets Dr. Kelso, where he meets Ray Fiennes' character, is set that young boy up for the worst failure in his life, because he's met someone on the mainland who it was the opposing, counterintuitive villain. It's all in the trailers in a bright red type of matter that looks like brain matter all over his body, massive bulging arms, like carries like this big stick or weapon, and you think, like, here we go, he's going to be like the villain, this cult leader of sorts. And when you're presented with this character, it's so soft. It's like it's also like melancholy to listen to him to speak. Like, it's the Latin, and he's like almost like very father figure to him. Like, with this moment of grieving, like so gentle. But the worst thing that could happen to this young boy is being presented with someone who he's just met on this mainland, who has that type of gentle aesthetic and gentle opinion of the outside view, because whoever that boy's going to meet next, which we find out, is going to get a big shock, because he's opened the world up, he's opened himself up. And granted, I'm sort of counterintuitive to what I've said before about these small towns and the idea about othering people. But as a 13, 14-year-old boy to be where he is in that circumstance in the finale, we'll get there a little bit, I'm sure. But he opens himself up to be engaged and to engage with people who are not going to be as kind and gentle and docile as a Ralph Fiennes, and ultimately it sets the groundwork. The break comes for its last few minutes and where we go forward, and it's going to be interesting to see a character who's essentially having to deal with the ideal of being groomed or grooming or being presented with the men in his life who are lying to him, and he's got to choose out of all these men giving him these tidbits and pieces of knowledge, how this young boy is going to then ultimately decorate his own life and his outlook, because it's going to get skewed. His father, his relationship with his father is not, it's not strong. The relationship he has with Ralph Fiennes is making this character who he's being told is a villain and isn't. Mm-hmm. And then he's met someone else who is being presented as something and quite clearly is not sound of mind. It's going to be an interesting, pardon my French, mindfuck for the next 3 hours of our time, next few years of his. Because like anyone in life, you meet people who are nice to one's face and are not very nice behind closed doors, and you meet other people who are not very nice to your face and not very nice behind closed doors, and both of them are not very nice in able to evolve in one's life if they're very close to. So I thought it was a really interesting approach to diffuse a circumstance for this kid in a very much counterintuitive way to how this arc would probably be presented, especially in the first film. You look at someone like Sergeant Henry West or Major Henry West, Chris Eccleston's character, as this authority figure in the British Army, thinking like what they're saved, and then it takes that turn. Mm-hmm. This is just the opposing figure of that, and I can't wait to talk about that because I've got a lot of opinions about that. But if anyone else wanted to mention something, because I just think it's such an interesting way to diffuse this kid being presented in such loving, not even loving, but within the circumstance of this plot. Because when Hillary describes that, if anyone's listening to it and not watched the film, you're thinking, he's presented what? He's done what? But within the film, it's done really quite gently. Like it's not. It doesn't feel out of place, which is probably a testament to the world landscape that they're in. But I think that's going to be the beginning of a very interesting issue he's going to have with authority and also father figures, which is a figure, which is an active arc to all this franchise, with fathers and figures of authority going AWOL, let's say. And but let's wherever you want to go now, Carson, it's up to you.
Let's go ahead and let's just say, Hillary, you can go next. Yeah. But I just want to say, let's open up for spoilers. I know we've already kind of spoiled like a lot of it, but let's get into officially all spoilers on the table. Hillary, take it away.
Yes, I was going to address I think first of all, I think one thing that at least in my experience, I'm just realizing now is I don't think I've seen Ralph Fiennes play a character like this in at least a very, very long time. He has been cast more as, villains or more hard-edged characters. And immediately, like the moment I start talking, I'm forgetting where I was going with this. I mean, it is possible. We only have one film so far, but it could be that this film starts sparking conversations about young men and the identity crisis that seems to be happening all over the place as far as like who young men believe they should be. And
brilliant.
And if he's 12, I think it's established he's 12. The way that your mind functions at 12, or at least my experience, and maybe it is different because I was a girl, is that if I met someone on the mainland that was like Ralph Fiennes, they are traveling alongside the Swedish soldier for a while, who does kind of give you another glimpse of what life is like outside of the quarantine zone, which is kind of goes back to the tagline, nothing has really changed. But you would have it in your head, or at least I would, where I'd be like, oh, well, this is someone else on the mainland. Like there's other people like that. Like maybe everyone is like that. Maybe it's just different. And of course, all of us being adults, like Jack just said, we know that that is not the case, that there are people who can seem very, very normal. And you have no idea what you're dealing with, or it could be like the ending of this movie, which is like, obviously these people are not normal. Like right away, like I don't know about you guys, but my audience started laughing, like, and my friend and I just started laughing immediately when the calisthenics started. We were just like, what? This is like a different movie.
Right. This is where this plays very differently to US or international audiences and the British audiences. For US audiences or international audiences, it would probably be just the UK here. Those characters will probably get lost in translation. You've got to sort of read about this if you're not from the UK. But that character that Jimmy is at the end is a cult of personality on the disgraced broadcaster Jimmy Savile in the UK. Now, Jimmy Savile was a radio broadcaster, then a TV game show host, and then from the 80s to probably the late 90s, and then intervals between that, he had a charity show called Jim Will Fix It, where kids would ring up to talk to him about, Jim, I need you to do this, I need you to do this for me. And like they might be going to watch a football game or helping my mom do this, maybe trivial tasks and stuff like that. Until 2012, where he was outed as a notorious paedophile for 60 to 70 years of his life, which the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, ultimately hid, knowing that they knew about it, with victims that are still alive today. His notoriety was so much there was inquiries about it. The British people, the public, were failed, and this man, as a DJ, was usually and as a broadcaster attacked children. Now, this man happens to be from Leeds, where I'm from. His reach was from Scotland to London. It mattered no bounds. It did not matter if you were a body or you were alive. He would go to the morgue, and I'm going to have to preface it. This was also mentally challenged children and also children just off the street. He had no bounds. It was notorious. And it only came out in 2012 after he died that there was some whistleblowers who did a documentary and then revealed it. Now, he's been almost eradicated from British culture. They knocked down his house in Leeds. They knocked down his house in Whitby. He raised millions of pounds for charity as well. But within the context, and bear in mind, he also had a house in Scotland where this film opening takes place. And it's very important because a lot of people are misconstruing that the opening takes place days after the initial outbreak, not 28 days later, days. People are thinking it's like the second outbreak. It's not, it's the first outbreak. So this young boy who was watching the Teletubbies is probably getting video reruns of a man who he thinks, this is where it's really important within this narrative and it makes a lot more sense, but the choice to do it is quite interesting on an international case, but I'll get to it just to mansplain. This boy is probably he's still stuck in 2002. England is these crimes have never been revealed. The time stopped in 2002. 23 years ago, and in real time, England just stopped. So they think the Queen's still alive. Nothing happened. Go on so forth. He's taken something that he believes to be an area of security, and he's juxtaposed that in an area of grooming, of like trying to take that on as a cult of personality, which is quite fitting on two degrees. First is that the irony of him dressing like Jimmy Savile and then calling all of them the Jimmies, and all dressing, and that's what Jimmy Savile used to look like: tracksuits, big cigar, red disco sunglasses, and white blonde hair. He screams Predator. So the fact that nobody sort of pointed that out is quite frightening. If anyone's out there, Google it and then wipe that straight away from your memory, just to know what that face of absolute predatory behaviour and scum looks like. But to take that on and to juxtapose that in a way that ultimately came in reality, I find not only chilling, but somewhat brilliant by Garland. Because essentially that outlines what we've mentioned throughout this podcast about that tagline: nothing changes. Destiny will always take place. It's a fitting tribute of that, regardless of if it doesn't happen here, then, where, or when. It is inevitable. destiny is inevitable, and it's always sort of programmed in this film about death. They're all going to die, but there's only very few people who can choose, and it's really well done there by Isla and the doctor and the young kid. They get to choose that. The young kid might not, Jamie might not, no one else in this film might not, but she got to choose. Very rare, but destiny, they're all going to die. It's how you play around with it. But the irony about him taking on that mantle of a notorious groomer, predator, and not knowing about it, there's a devilish irony about that, in the fact that, regardless if it ever came out, it was always destined to at least take on its mantle. I think that's an interesting thing about Garland proposing something there, that this was always going to happen, the virus. England was always going to go like this. Maybe it just took the mantle of a virus instead of Brexit. And I find that fascinating, that England is prone to destroy itself. Maybe the world, maybe Europe, maybe the world. It's prone to annihilation, but it depends. It doesn't depend on the inevitable. It's going to happen, but how does it happen here? And the fact that it happens in a animal testing ground, and here, and then you've got these 5 freaks dressing up as a cult of personality, and you've got people in the, like, I've read a lot of comments. I know I'm going on here, apologise, but I've read a lot of comments saying, why would they dress like him? Turn on the news, look at cult of personality, red hats, wearing red armbands in the 40s. Sorry, the Hitler Youth. We have a strange magnetic pull into wanting to be a part of the larger crowd. And again, about the townsfolk here, you're either with us or against us. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. They've all got the cult of personality. It's just that we determine what's right and wrong, which with anyone with a lick of empathy or morality can justify those things. But I think it's a fascinating approach that this was inevitable. England would be like this in Garland's eyes. Look at Civil War. I mean, warfare. He's annihilation. His films are constantly looking at that. It's going to happen. How is mankind, or how a society is going to break down? How do we then approach it? And how is it going to happen in a certain way? I think the Jimmy Savile thing is an incredibly rich, although controversial, tentacle of what these films are now going to present. In that this young boy was always going to go off on his own. His end date is already written. How he gets there is another story, and his choices. I think it's so rich. Why they've gone for the Jimmy Savile thing, I find, again, from their probably age range, would probably make more sense. For an international point of view, it's sort of a bit of a swing and a miss, because it's presented in a very Highland reality. They all like Power Ranger moves, and I was like, this is strange, and I think that's why people laugh. But when you look at the beginning, when the boy, he leaves the Power Ranger there, he thinks he's mature. He's not. He sees someone of authority who's positioned above him. Let's be friends. Big blonde hair, all the jewelry he's never seen. He's just found his Power Ranger. He's found his Captain America, and the MCU stands weird night. The other ones are like the Eternals in the background. But I digress. But I think it's such an interesting parallel that regardless if Jimmy Savile, or if it's Jack O'Connell's Jimmy, there's risks there, and how Nia DaCosta's going to deal with that in the sequel. I've got major issues with that, because these films, that's a primarily British subject matter. Granted, it'll be very much a thin line of, like, they're not going to adamantly say it's Jimmy Savile. But how an American woman's going to come over, it doesn't really matter about a gender, but I think it does really matter about culture. Is going to look at British institution like that and deal with it. I'm quite interested, and I don't want to. That's like to slag it off. That's going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I find that's going to be a really big task for an American to do, because the Spaniard who did the sequel 28 weeks later sort of makes sense, because you're coming from an area back to London that's not quite the same. But to have someone with a completely different culture, also as well, I think the gender does matter, because you're looking at motherhood now is gone. You're looking at masculinity, like Hillary said. So maybe that is a really interesting angle, I suppose. Maybe gender, race is definitely going to play a part of it, because there's going to be that everyone is white here to a certain degree, and They don't like each other, and then you've got the cultural opinion of Brits and America. I think it'd be fascinating to have a look. But I'll go on because I know I've gone on forever. But that's the explanation of Jimmy Savile, or the Jimmies, which is littered throughout the film quite well. But the one thing I did want to mention before I moved on, and I swear to God, this will be seconds here. Did anyone notice with the body that they're collecting the blood?
Yeah, I did. That was one of the indications where I was like, "There's something wrong." And the carvings on his back, I thought that's not just an accident. That was put
very
there.
Interesting.
Very weird. I think just as far as like Jimmy Savile is concerned, I had heard the name and I knew what he did, but I didn't know what he looked like. So I looked up the images of him.
Well, I apologize for that. That's the whole thing.
I'm not scarred.
It's terrifying.
Yes,
it's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, or someone were like, if you don't know that about him, you're just like, oh, well, that's a bit eccentric. I mean, I guess it's the equivalent of like Michael Jackson, the United States.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, it's someone who looks quite strange. He's had a really horrible childhood and obviously he has some issues, but then allegations come out about what he's done, and immediately it's just like, well, he always looked strange, so it's like maybe that should have been a red flag. But either way, so of course, like I didn't make that connection whatsoever. I think that the connection more for me was with the color coding of the Teletubbies. I'm not sure. I'd have to see the end again, where it's like, is each person wearing like a different color that has to do with the Teletubbies?
No, you're right, Hillary. That is there. That is definitely there. Yeah.
And then the Power Rangers. The Power Rangers, I didn't quite make the connection with until later, where I thought like, yeah, they're doing all those moves like the Power Rangers. So like you said, it is stuck in 2002, as well as like the island is stuck in 2002, and they still think the Queen is alive, going back to what Carson was saying. And it did make me think of other films, like they didn't quite go into it as much. It would have been interesting in A Quiet Place Part 2. There's also an island where there is a community living, probably not a cult. It doesn't come across that way. I don't want to throw that community under the bus because we don't know much about it. But as far as like being isolated from, a force, an other that is attacking and killing people. And I think another one I should recommend, it is a bit different. It's a film that came out probably within the past 2 years. Yes, 2023. It's called The King Tide. And that is also about an isolated community that's living on an island that is completely cut off from outside society. And there's things going on that are unusual on the island. And that's all I want to say about it. And it does involve a baby. So I would say if you want to see something that is a little bit more island based and has to do with, the inner workings of a small community, and the factions, in conflict with each other, I'd say watch The King Tide if you want something to explore, or maybe hold you over until the second one. But it does, and also what you were saying, you kept using the term grooming, and I thought that's a really interesting choice of words, because throughout the entire film I kept thinking about indoctrination. Like everything that Jamie is doing with his son is indoctrination. And then they have like the cut to the island and they're all singing Abide With Me, and I'm like, this is a cult. And then it shows all the women doing like women things and the men have to do man things, and it's like, this is a cult. Like everything about it is cultish, and like the mask is a huge red flag, and just everything. And so the second one, it probably will move into another cultish environment where like now I don't think it'll go this direction, because I don't think they'd be able to get away with it. And also they don't know the truth about Jimmy Savile. So it's like, oh, is this going to be another situation where it's like a forced breeding or forced like human trafficking, sex slavery thing where like they're trying to do that? I hope not, but we'll see. The one thing we do have on the horizon though, unless, they're choosing to go a radically different route, is that somewhere down the line, Cillian Murphy is supposed to appear as Jim again.
Yeah.
And considering how he is at the end of 28 Days Later, he is someone who had to go feral, and he was, saving two women from basically like sexual slavery. So I think for a lot of people, that amount of violence is justified at that point. He seems to be okay at the end, and he's living, with these two women, waiting for help. We don't know what happens to him. He seems fairly well adjusted considering what happened. We don't know what's happened in the 28 years since that, but he could prove to be the father figure that maybe Spike needs at the end of the road. But that's the optimist to me. I don't know what you guys think.
See, I'm really curious about this franchise moving forward, not just because the talent behind the camera. You mentioned that the next one could be like The Last Jedi, which is very accurate also, because it's like this same crew that made 28 years later is coming back for part 3. So you just have canonical one. But I've also heard through the grapevine that Murphy's supposed to be like the main character of part 3. The focus is supposed to really shift towards him. I don't know if that's true or not. Just gossip I've heard. But I thought that choice felt really odd considering we're setting up Alfie so much, but apparently it's supposed to be like, I've heard at least, transitioning from Alfie towards Murphy. So I don't know. I'm not necessarily like, I like all the talents involved. I definitely like this one a lot more talking about it. And I really like Nita Costa. I think she's genuinely quite underrated as a director. Really appreciate her Candyman take. But as a structure of a trilogy, I'm definitely like, I'm hopeful, but I'm not necessarily, I would not bet money that this is all going to come together.
So from what I've heard is that the second one is going to deal with the Jimmies and Spike. And then there's going to be a coda, very much like there was with Jimmy at the beginning of this one, where Jim is introduced. Now, you're telling me, and the fact that people have not really realised this, but it's so evident, you've got 5 characters called Jimmy. Jimmy's throughout the film plastered in visual, but also iconography in bodies and so on and so forth. And then you have his prologue and the epilogue. You're telling me that there's not going to be a slight little bit of interest that they're also bringing a legacy character in who happens to be called Jim.
I know.
So it's very... So to me, I've got two minds of this. First of all, I would not bring them back because, like Carson said, you've also set this world up. We don't need to go back to these characters. We've had their arcs. That's why we didn't need to do them 28 weeks later. It's done. We can have vignettes. But the other thing I think what will happen is that there's obviously going to be a relationship with Spike and these Jimmies that's going to ultimately deteriorate. I think Jimmy's going to force him to kill Jamie. And they're going to take the run at the Holy Land, which is the compound. And then Spike is going to be left on his own for real, as now an adult, in the shit. And he's just going to go happen to meet someone called Jim. And he's going to have to work out that throughout his life, then there's been Jimmies and there's been Jims. He's going to have to make the decision whether this man's going to be good or going to be bad. And I think it's going to really play with that legacy character about how we perceive him, how Spike is going to perceive him, what we want from Jim. Do we want Jim to have had a safe life living with Selena and Hannah? Do we really think that's happened in 28 years with the mental issues, the psychological scarring? It's going to be very interesting how it presents that. But I think it'll just present it to Spike on a very, very flat, on the nose level about, you've met 2 people called Jim. One was horrible. Isn't probably going to make him kill his father in order to get him back into this cult. And then the other option is, you're going to have to trust someone else and you're going to have the same issues. You're going to have to choose who you trust, and sometimes it's going to be bad, sometimes it's going to be good. And that's the way of life. You put your faith in people and they let you down. Some people purposely want to burn you. But that's what I've heard. Well, not what I've heard, but that's he's definitely in the second one. I know he has a coda in that because he filmed parts in Newcastle. While I was, not while I was there, but I know that the narrative, you can see what it's going to be set up like. But no, can we talk about the baby?
Sure,
please.
I mean, I'll go first. That's Garland, 110%. Like, that's Annihilation. That's someone who's wanting to ask the major question now about preconceived conceptions of franchise law. If that baby has saliva or it suckles on someone's breast for milk, is that not going to be a direct issue of contamination? Would that family now is going to have to take this child on? They've got no idea what it is except for the letter of a child saying it came from an infected. Well, they ain't going to pick that up, are they? Like, it's a massive just present something and the fallout will take place. So how that ramifications of that is going to be really interesting. If that's going to be written as a cure, I don't think so. It's too cute for that. No way will they do that. I think these characters will ultimately become a cult of personality to this child. They will put in, it will just go back, this cult of personality on Jimmy, saving them, keeping them away from the infected and saving them and giving them this lifestyle. This Holy Land will take centre stage, and this child, like Jesus Christ, will be presented as the Messiah, and it will have major ramifications for the future of the UK and also the world as the baby who can never be infected. And that's, again, time doesn't change anything. We go back to what it was like, and again, prehistoric ages, or the Roman Empire ages, or the Babylon, in that we put messiahs, and I think that's the way this is going to go. In that the bitterness of, in the long run, putting hope into something, and putting hope into others, and not letting them have a choice. Spike never had a choice whether he wanted to go to the island or not. His dad was always going to take him there. This baby going forward is going to be presented as the Messiah, and it's probably going to destroy its life. There's going to be major ramifications for that in the future. Look at Mother with Darren Aronofsky, how it's presented there. People tearing that child to pieces for its flesh in order to cure ailments. It'll be major issues as society goes forward. But how it's presented in the film as such, it's quite visceral. It's quite difficult to watch. It's also presented in such a way that feels like counter to the thematic is what you would approach. And there's also then the issues with the alpha. Like, is that impregnate? There's a lot of questions there, but I thought it was well done. But it's you just, when that happened, I was like, I know where this is going for Alex Garland. You can tell, like, that just writes itself. So I've got really much not else to say aside from it was very difficult to watch, but an interesting, albeit one that feels somewhat predictable in the long run.
I have to break in here and say the movie I just mentioned, The King Tide. If you have any interest in what Jack is saying, you have to see this film, because the name of the baby is also Isla, that is found in this film on this island. And there's definite similarities between what he is predicting here and what takes place in The King Tide. So definitely worth checking out. But I think another thing to kind of tie back to, like, not only the baby, but like the pregnant infected Samson or / the alpha character. One of the things I noted right away, where I thought there's going to be complaints on the internet about this, although it is possible that it was intentional, is that we don't see any people of color in the film. The only time we see them is they are infected. I mean, like some of the slower zombies. Well, first of all, I was seeing that happening, and I thought, I don't know if this is a good idea. Like, people who are overweight or considered fat or whatever are, like, they feel pretty, persecuted just to begin with, and like, you're starting with zombies that look like this. Some of them are Asian. Anybody who is a different color, there always happen to be someone who's diseased or infected, or there's something disgusting about them, and that could suggest to some people that either the filmmakers feel that way, or if they're trying to make a commentary as far as, like, all people who are considered other were abandoned and pushed out, so they were left to be infected, and that's definitely what we're seeing. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm sure that Twitter is the place to, talk about that in a really mature way, or maybe Reddit. I don't know.
I think you're 100% right, though. I think it's definitely a conscious decision to do that. One that, like the Jimmy Savile stuff, you've got to trust your audience there, because once you present something and you don't, well, I mean, you've just got to have trust in your audience, I suppose. I don't think there's anything sort of inherently racist about that. I think that it's about race. I think it's about racism. I think it's about others. I mean, there's the othering in horror, primarily since it's dawn of age, about, like, Nosferatu and being different from others and having different types of religious beliefs and so on. But I think that the conversation about cult of personality, again, it just echoed through. You've got the Jimmy in the second one. You're going to have the baby, cult of personality baby in the third one, and going forward. And this one, you've got the idea of religious or community-based. I mean, the opening 10 minutes, the opening 5-6 minutes, like when it goes back in time, it starts, gives the audience a refresher, and ultimately does a retread. I found to be, like, generally quite gross.
Yeah.
Because it scared me to death about the Teletubbies, because that's like, oh my God, these kids. When I saw the trailer, I was like, shit. Like, I know I can't watch that. I thought that was surprisingly not dumbed down, but I thought it had a pull back. It pulled its punch there. I didn't think it would do that. I thought we'd have a wide shot of that room and we'd see that being torn to shreds. But the film needs to move on. But when we get into the church and we meet this Jimmy's father, he's like, oh, the rapture's coming. Like, it's the next thing for mankind. But, like, he's opening his life like, oh, this is the end. I'm going to go to the next step. But yet gives his son the cross and says, flee. There's something you've got to deal with there as a child. Like, hang on a second, my dad's taken not the easy way out, but he's gone on to the next step, and now he's left me in the shit. Then when he hides, he says, Holy Father, why have you forsaken us? Which obviously the double meaning of his own father being a priest and also God himself. This idea, this cult personality, like it's brewing throughout. Like, where do we put as an audience, where do we put our safety? Like, who other can you trust? You know, this idea about there's there's loads of stuff, but like Hillary said about the when we mentioned the bag of blood, and also when you get to like this Eric's ship, this Swedish ship, we hit something. You hit something on a patrol boat. I don't know. There's a lot there where they could go over a lot of stuff. I don't know, but yeah, the one thing I did want to mention, not if Carson wanted to come in about the baby. I'm sure he's rich to talk about it, but I've heard we talked about Reddit and Twitter. The feedback to the score is getting really mixed reviews. Danny Boyle has a relationship with the young fathers on T2 Trainspotting, and he's obviously done a few other stuff in between to engage with them. I thought they did an amicable job here. It's very ethereal. Is that the word? Yeah, it is. Because I say ethereal, but it's not. My wife will mention it. It's ethereal. Like there's, I probably said that wrong. Yeah, I apologize. But it's very much like heightened to a point where it feels gothic, very church-like organs. Like the opening when his father, like in the church, is like being taken away. Like he's like turning at the same point. Like how this, like, it's called Promised Land. Like it's like a church hymn. It's dead weird to listen to when you're watching something on screen like so violent. It really works, and especially on the Causeway, I thought it was really well done. I like the score, but I can understand why someone would look at that and be like, no John Murthy, no Underworld, no in a House and a Heartbeat. It definitely detaches itself on an audible level, especially considering like Alex Garland's input on Civil War and Warfare, I haven't seen Warfare, but I'm very well aware of it. The use of sound design in those films are like, whoo. Here, not as strong, and the visual elements of being like claustrophobic with the iPhone didn't really work, and the use of night vision, seeing these beading red eyes and seeing the deer being ripped apart. I felt, weirdly enough, it sort of pulled its punches on the gore level to a certain degree. I'll say that, but definitely didn't. It was nowhere near as horrifying as the second one. Nowhere near horrifying as the first one. But Carson, the baby or the composer, I'll let you go. I'll let you, where you want to go with that. Please,
and I feel,
the baby.
I feel more mid about both. I mean, I guess the baby's more interesting. Like, it definitely is very Garland. I don't necessarily think it was the most shocking or interesting part of the film for me. Like, it was just definitely there. The score was pretty strong, I thought. I really like how this film sounded. I had no idea that was getting debated or torn apart, so that's news to me. But I don't know. The baby's just like, as you mentioned, it's just so classic Garland, where he's going to put something like that in there. You know where that narrative is going. It is so separated in a sense of like, it's interesting because with something like, this is gonna be a weird comparison, but with Avatar, The Way of Water, they set up a lot of plots where, like, you know, okay, for like 3 films down, we're going to get there. You're building that stuff up. And for some reason, that film really worked for me. For this, it just kind of felt like, I just want this to be, I think, more focused than it's actually going to be. And I get we have 3 films here to work with. I think it's a problem with what is even just presented in this film, where I think you have a really compelling character in this kid who's going through this really compelling journey. I think it's only probably going to increase once you add more characters and you go through the other films. I don't need that element. I don't think it adds anything for what I was really enjoying within the film. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Again, it's hard to kind of speculate when you don't know exactly how it's going to play. For me, it just was like, I don't care. I just want us to get focused and stay with what's actually interesting. I didn't find that to be it's a memorable scene, right? It's hard to watch. But I didn't find it to be particularly fascinating.
Well, Hillary sort of put my interest up with this about the idea of when you mentioned like grooming, indoctrinating, and the idea of if those themes about Jimmy Savile are going to be followed through. The one thing I wanted to mention, and I was like watching, I was like, that's strange. And like what Hillary said, like there's loads of bits in here where you don't pick up on it until after like the blood bag. Did anyone else think that it was slightly strange that when we're presented with this woman who's pregnant, we see her in a pack, right, by the river cleaning herself, right? Or maybe they're scavenging for like fish or mites in the water, right? And then when we meet her neck, she's hog-tied on a desolate train.
Is she
I
tied
think
up?
there's a miss. I thought yeah, because she can't escape, can she? She's like tied to the chair, and then she's like
Oh.
well, I don't know, but I find it strange that like she's in a pack, and then she's on her own. I think there's a missing gap there. I think they've left, like what Carson said, they're either leaving this out to play with next, or let it be as what it is, depending on how the audience take it. That baby is either Samson's, the Alpha's, and he's protecting it because it's the first time that someone's interacted with it and allowed that child to be born and probably not devoured, and then that's broken the chain, the evolutional chain. I think that's the way it will go because audiences perceived it, or that's something to do with Jack O'Connor's Jimmy's, and the ramifications of that I'll leave up to the people at home to think about doing what they want with anything they want whenever they want. I think that'll depend on how audiences perceive this film. I think most people will see it as Samson's child and the evolution has been broken, and then that will fit more to Garland's further extent in the sequels. Or you'll get the Danny Boyle thing where it'll be like, actually, that's these characters who've done it, and that's how disgusting they are. And because I think it writes itself in either way. I'd be fascinated to know which direction. I think they'll go for the Samson one because it makes more of a sense. But why would he then search for that child? Like what connection would he have? It's just weird that I don't see that as being a palatable option aside from him, because he does search for them, but then again he's in the area. I don't know. There's a lot here to sort of find, square pegs and round circle and stuff like that. I think there's a lot where you can work out and think, well, maybe it's that. But for me, the more terrifying aspect of it is depending on how you see the Foundation. Do you think it's terrifying that this virus is mutating to the point where they're having children, it's evolving them, and that humanity again has gone to a chain that's evolving, changed something, and then something else has exploded? Because it's sort of like a mirroring of the opening in the laboratory there. Humanity is changing the dynamics of of what's going to go forward in humanity, and interrupt that cycle and unleash something. I think they've done the same here. Again, like the mirroring of the change of what humanity is and where the virus is. They're opposing. They're being switched, and I think that's what like the Planet of the Apes thing has done now. It's interesting, the connections, but is that going to be frightening? Like, yes, because we have changed it again, and what's next is going to be quite frightening. But the other alternate there is so chilling and like so horrifying that these characters are like wanting to do anything because they're playing with like the food essentially, and these people can't consent, they can't dictate, all they know is rage, and they're being, well, I don't know what word to describe that as is, but again, I don't want to go. This is going to get age restricted. This podcast. I don't know. What that leads me to think that this kid who has seen his father, his mother, his six sisters, because there's six of them and seven of them, including him, all wearing blonde hair as well. That's so fucked up psychological damage that I don't know. That makes me skin crawl just thinking about it. So I've got to go to bed tonight, so I don't want to talk much more about that. But there's a lot where they could go with this. I wonder, because I think it's been described as this is a film of nature. The second one is the nature of evil, and the third one is nature of redemption. So whatever Nia DaCosta is doing next, I think it's going to be proper fucked up. I can just see it just going really nasty.
And I hope it does. I mean, just what you said there is obviously like chilling and disgusting. It makes you want to throw up, which I think is what I want from a film like this.
Mm-hmm.
I will push back though that like it is interesting. Whatever vision they have for this, they must feel quite confident in, because again, like that film is done. Like it doesn't really matter how the audience reacts in this film to it, because that film is in January ready to go. Maybe some small edits can be done here and there, but like the overall direction is pretty locked in. And that gives me some faith in itself that like I think they have a clear vision for how this is all going to build. It'll be really interesting revisiting this film once we get the context of film 2, and especially I think film 3, and we can really analyze it within the context of this whole trilogy. Because as of now, I think it's hard to like fully analyze what this baby means and where they go with it. And one of the concerns is like, you don't want your ideas in your head to be more horrifying or more impactful than what they actually end up doing. But there's definitely room there for something quite disgusting.
Carson, you've been doing the programming this now for like quite a long time. I'm just going to ask you a question now. I'm fascinated to answer. Horror movies in January. Do they have a really great
You know what?
response, or
No, they
what do you
don't.
think? Because does
You know
that both
what?
worry you slightly? Because it's a quick
Yeah.
turnaround.
Yes. And I was like, oh, Wolfman is going to break that. And then we got Wolfman. So definitely it does. But also, like, yes, but if they're going to make a film 3, like, I can't imagine film 2 is just going to be horrific.
No.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I hope not.
It's got too much. It's got too much baggage. I mean, I don't think number 2 will dictate whether the third one gets made. I think this one will. And I think that they've had major rights between 20th Century Fox and Sony, and then obviously that goes back to Disney. Disney didn't want to make these anymore. The producer actually bought the rights to this, sold it back to Disney, and the guy behind Disney was like, to Sony, it was like, look, you want a 3-picture deal in this culture and in this cinematic landscape, we can't do 3. If we do 1 and then we do 2 and no one goes to see 3, we're in the shit. They don't have a streaming platform, Sony, at all, so there's no way to just dump it. They're not going to sell it to anyone because you've got 2 other films and a package deal. It doesn't work. So I can understand why they've done 2 back to back. It's a big gamble, it is, but I agree with you. I think that the slight concerns of that. Why would Danny Boyle go back to the third one and it's going to be like it feels like it's going to be like blue, green, blue. Like it just feels like there's going to be one outlier, and Nia DaCosta has the chance to really, really go to base there, or really just swing for the hills. And I'll be fascinated to know which one she does. But I'm with you. I've got more hope. But I like this, so I don't know. Maybe I'm going to hate the second one. Maybe you two will love that more. I don't know. It'll all be that first trailer, I think, and the promotional images, because nothing has been revealed about it. They've shot it on location. They've shot it in studios in California as well, and they've done a lot of obviously environment work in West Yorkshire, Gateshead, and Newcastle. And Scotland. It'll be very interesting to see what it looks like.
I mean, I think this is off to a better start than like. I think people are responding well to this film. So I agree that I think part 3 will be made. This is definitely doing better momentum than like the Strangers trilogy right now, or the Horizon trilogy, which somehow we still have not got chapter 2 for, but that's a conversation for another day. So I'm more hopeful, but the release date is very odd. You would think like October, maybe just like mid-January, not even early January. It's very, very strange, but we'll see.
I think the only springtime release I could think of, or early release where I went and we were really impressed, was The Invisible Man. Like right before, I think that was the last film we saw before COVID hit. We were really impressed with that film, and that kind of film doesn't usually come out in January, February. So who knows?
That was February, and a lot of like the John Wicks were February. So like,
yeah. So there's a chance, or I think that and I think like the Hunger Games movies, the first one, I think it was more like March or April or something. But we were still. I remember still being leery at the time, thinking, why are they releasing it then? Isn't that when they kind of dump movies they don't want people to see? But it turned out fine. People went.
Companion was kind of fun this year, so
yeah.
Maybe this is going to be the one that changes up how we view January in film. Who knows? With that, I think, is there anything else that you guys want to get into as far as 28 years later?
I have 2 points. One is the amount of plot armor that Spike and Isla have. The gas station scene for me was really, really hard to justify. And I did talk about it later, where I thought that was like Harrison Ford in the fridge in Indiana Jones 4. Like if someone shoots in there, an entire place gets incinerated and they're like not even scorched, like no burns, no nothing. Like that to me was just a little bit too unbelievable. And I mean, that is kind of a trope in zombie things, like plot needed, like when it's convenient, like everyone is off their guard and there's no zombies, but then when it needs time for an action sequence, suddenly like zombies show up and have to fight them. That was a bit in the film too, where it's like, wow, they seem like really unguarded and they're like in a meadow, like just surrounded by hills, and these zombies could show up any moment, but they don't seem worried about it because it's like, it's just written that way. There's going to be no zombies there. It's a plot convenience. And I think the last thought I have is films like this do reflect, I think, 21st century anxieties. I put a list together. I'll put a link for it in my my monstrous list recommendations from podcasts. You can look that up, and it's like I make a mini show notes for every episode I'm on, like things that are mentioned, whether it's films are all on the list, and then there's like links in the description as far as like things we might mention that people be like, I have no idea what that might be referring to. There'll be like a bit.ly link or something, but this particular list I made is just everything made after 2000. And I think particularly after 2001, when, you know, the US went to war with Afghanistan, or they went to war with Iraq when they went to Afghanistan. And well, anyway, it was just a big mess. I'm not going to get into that at the moment, but I think the explosion of war at the very beginning, very much like it resulted in a bunch of films feeling out different scenarios. 28 Days Later is the first one on the list because it's the earliest one. But it really did make me reevaluate like how in art there's been all these different iterations of post-apocalyptic filmmaking, different things, like everything from like Bird Box, which I have not seen. I've heard a lot of jokes about it, to A Quiet Place, or The Road, or The Rover, or Children of Men. Things like that are in that list there. So if people are, you know, looking for something to kind of whet their appetite while they wait for whether this succeeds or fails in January, I'd recommend checking out that list and just seeing like what is out there, because I went and looked around and there's a lot. There's actually a lot I haven't seen yet. So interesting stuff.
You should watch an ad, Finch, from Apple TV Plus. I really enjoyed that. It was like a surprise hit. Tom Hanks stars in it. I enjoyed it. I'll say there's two things I wanted to bring up. First, I'll bring with negative. Hated the dream sequence during the scene when they're camping out in the house that falls apart randomly. Just like my biggest pet peeve in horror movies. Have faith in your horror, and this is a very horrific film, a lot of blood, a lot of violence. I just didn't need a dream sequence. And then I thought the effects were fantastic with the zombies. I feel like we're at a point where like it might not be revolutionary, so I think it's a lot of people overlook how good these look, but I thought all the effects looked really strong. I agree with you, Hillary. I didn't necessarily love some of the kill sequences. I thought maybe it was going a little far in places, but I still think the actual practical effects were quite strong.
Mm-hmm. Oh, one last thing. You guys were talking about the score and I didn't weigh in. Oops, sorry. I just bumped something there. Maybe you can edit that out. The use of the poem Boots in the trailer, I wondered to myself upon seeing it, it's like, is this in the film, or is this something that a genius came up with and incorporated into the marketing? Because there was a lot of discussion about this reading. I went into a rabbit hole about it. I found out that the guy who recited it is an actor I've seen in a lot of things and has done voice work. His last credit was playing King Stefan in Sleeping Beauty. So I thought, oh, wow, I've actually heard this guy's voice before a lot. I ended up not really liking how that was incorporated into the film. Like they just like remixed it and then like kept throwing parts of it in with actual like vintage footage, and then it seems like clips and pieces from other vintage films as well. I think that didn't do it for me. I almost have a theory that there was two different edits made of the film. There's only one editor I checked that was in charge of post-production, but I feel like there may have been like a more like rapid fire, more violent cut, and then there was like a slower contemplative cut, and like neither of them tested well, so they just blended them together and that's what we got. Did you guys find certain things disparate? Like there was random cuts like Laurence Olivier in another film and people with arrows. What was that? How did that work for you?
I just thought it was an echo about like this again, the thematic of nothing really changes. I also think it's echoes of what's yet to come. I think there's going to be a massive issue with that Holy Land, the compound. Something's going to happen there. I think it's just that, you know, you can fight with arrows 200, 300, 400, maybe 1,000 years ago in this country, in the UK, and nothing has changed. You're still going to fight with bows and arrows to survive. And I think the idea of like that legacy media about with presented of like, oh, it's in a film, it's old, it's black and white, you know, it doesn't mean anything now. And they're back to basics in the year of what, 20, well, it'd be 2030 at that point, won't it? Like there's an irony there, and I think that's what it's been. But I agree with you. It's sort of presented and then stopped. But that's the only way where I was like, oh my god, they're in a cult when they show the mask. I was like, oh my God, is that the Jimmys? And then it's later revealed that there's a young girl
Mm-hmm.
for Spike's graduation into a manhood where it's presented as that. I'm like, oh my God, like you were bang on, Hillary, about they're in the cult as well. And it's not really well presented because it's something you've got to sort of work at, but I quite like that. But yeah, there's an interesting intercutting of legacy media. Very little of 28 Weeks Later.
Yes, I
Some
noticed
of
that. Yeah, there was some
yeah,
shots where from
in the
the
crowd.
crowd kills by the snipers.
Well, within the canon, France has been nuked.
Oh my God! See, I didn't know
Yeah,
that. It's
so
what's shown at the end of 28 Weeks, but I didn't know that Frank's was
yeah,
nuked. That's absolutely crazy.
yeah. So it's an interesting one, but they've still contaminate will contain the UK, which I thought was interesting. Like they're keeping it alive. Why? We'll find out, I'm sure. But another interesting question, like why go to such extent to annihilate the French and then the UK, which is the destination where it's occurred. There's an interesting one there, isn't it? Perhaps it's again you get to that race aspect of class and race about if this had been in India or Afghanistan, like you said, or Iraq, these countries, would they have been vaporized or would they have been contained? Begs the question, doesn't it? I think Guile and Danny Boyle are also just showcasing that, you know, there's a probably not only a double standard, but there's a conversation there about privilege, which I don't think audiences are prepared to divulge. But again, I think this film's so rich with that. Do you know? It's funny we mentioned Tenet and stuff, shit like that earlier about watching a film and then divulging it and talking about it. I'll be honest, having this conversation with you two has actually made me like the film more, which is very rare. I do that. The Wolfman, I was like, oh, I liked it, and I'll get with Carson. I'm like, God, this film wasn't very good, and the iconography, what have they done? And you sort of work out within real time. But with here, just hearing your two opinions, and it's interesting having an international opinion on an opinion on this film. It's obviously helped it twofold. But I actually really like this film more, and I think you'll be shocked what I'm going to give this. I'll leave it to the letterbox if we want to talk about what we're going to give it. But I'm really happy I saw this. I'm really hopeful for what the next one's going to be. I can't wait. It does feel like a long time has been dormant, and when you watch this, I'll be honest, it hasn't really been worth it. This felt like it could have been done 10 years ago. I don't think it's much common now, aside from the fact that the actual UK gravity, political climate, the social construct of everything that's happened has brewed to a point where, you know, art and real life are beginning to imitate each other. And, you know, I think, like you said, like the issue of the rise of certain two people from Romania and the rise of masculinity and how people look at someone and they idolize or father figure. There's one thing I wanted to end on. I hope I'm not going on, but I thought it was pivotal to the film. In horror, there's always a conversation about why don't you just get on your fucking phone and ring the police? And in this film, there's a sequence where Eric, or is Edvig? I can't remember. I think it's Edvig. That might be the actor's name, but the Swedish military guy.
I think it
has
was
the phone
Eric, right? Was it Eric?
Yeah, I think it was. He had a twang in it. It was like Edric. It could be. I could be completely wrong. I apologise to our Scandinavian fans over there. I apologise, and it didn't really get a really good end either.
No.
But no, it's quite barbaric. But it's interesting about the idea of masculinity, how that's presented in that he's the soldier, he's carrying the mother, he's helping the boy. They have a conversation about, you know, like a father and son moment. Like Jodie Comer asks, does your dad, does he joke with you? And he's like, no. And you have this Eric, and they have this like weird bonding about how his girlfriend looks, which I think was also probably you can unravel that to an idea of misogyny or perhaps so on and so forth. I don't really think that's relevant, but it's there. But they have this chat, and he's on his phone. Like the last thing he's gonna see is his girlfriend, and this phone that is just useless. He just throws away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting how the phone in our world is pivotal for information, conversation, and also being fed manipulation or figures of authority telling you how you should speak to people or how you should degrade people. I just thought it was very interesting that he just throws the phone away in the background. That's me probably reading into it, probably double that it's worth. But I just thought it was imperative that, you know, the first thing he would have thought is that he looked somewhere with power and charged it up. But he's just resigned to, we're in a place here where it can't be saved. No one's coming for me. And I think it's an interesting thread about how the UK's and this virus is presented in that people who go here have got no hope, but the people who live there have got no choice for hope, which is an interesting parallel to how people are presented in the world today about in third world countries and stuff like that. It was just very, very much interesting. I know I'd probably say that, probably describing that to an extent where it's like, oh, you're just repeating yourself. But I do think this is full of weight, full of meat, with the pardon the pun. But the more I've talked about it, the more I think this is really, really, really good, which it was actually shocking because I was not prepared to be this engaged with a legacy film, which me and Carson have sort of turned ourselves away in the last few years. Well, probably the last few years about, the blockbuster and the legacy sequels. It's tough, but this felt paramount to be made now, and I hope a lot of audiences watch this and read between the lines. God hope. Anyway.
I have one last thing to say, and this is just a joke, because you were talking about, like, we're seeing a lot of stuff about this particular outbreak and how it's affecting Europe and everything, and I thought, oh my god, if I was given the keys to direct this, I would direct, like, I mean, I'd be given that line of the story, but I would be so tempted to just do a cut when it's like, meanwhile in the Middle East, and it's solar punk and everything's fine. Like they actually have their shit together more than the rest of the world, and they're healing, and like everything's done, just a lot more calm.
Well,
like they have their shit together, but and then it just cuts back to England and it's just zombies again. Like that would be hilarious.
They did that with World War Z, didn't they? With a certain Middle Eastern place where I think if you did that now, you would have serious trouble. And even back then, it was like, oh, this feels overtly political. I think, I think the fact that we've had glimpses of that and they've returned to the UK probably tells you how much of the shit this land is really in the mainland. But no, I agree with you. I think it'd be fascinating to know what it would be like in those two kids or where they are in mainland Europe, if they're dead or not. How does someone deal with that,
I'm just like, I just want to cut away to like Africa, and it's like, meanwhile in Africa everything's fine, just like other places that the Western world kind of looks down on. It just cuts these third world countries, and it's like I was reading somewhere, I don't remember what country it was, but it was about like it was a third world country somewhere in the Middle East. I don't want to make a guess because I'll probably be incorrect, but they're making huge leaps forward as far as like using renewable energy and stuff like that. And I thought that'd be so hilarious if like the Western world falls apart, and meanwhile this little country there, it's like, oh, well, it's all janky and it's been war torn, and brown people are there, whatever.
Something there,
and it's like they're doing great because they're getting out ahead of everyone, and they might be doing a lot better if there's like an ecological disaster. So
I think you're onto something there. Like, where does Europe, if it gets to place, it's going to go to North Africa, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe.
And Africa is a third world continent. The irony of that, the business then would have to change. A lot more. The economy would be put to North Africa. It'd become a powerhouse. It'd be enriched with minerals. It also has mass amounts of land. It's a fascinating side conversation now. Like, comic books and stuff like that, a graphic novel. I'd love to see where that's done, because it's a part of this landscape where this world's a lot bigger than I think it probably thinks it is, and it's a Star Wars issue. You've all got to have Han Solo and a fucking lightsaber. Where no, we can build here. There's a big land here, and I like that thread. I really do. That'd be really interesting, fascinating. Because then you got the racial thing there as well. Like, you have like, who then is the third world? Like, do the people who go to Africa, do they assimilate, or do they take over, like we've seen in what happens in the modern world now? Colonization
again.
I think it'd be fascinating. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I think it was I think it may have been, it was either 5th or 6th grade. We read a book and I don't remember the name now. I'll put a link to it in the list I mentioned, recommendations from podcasts, where it was such an interesting choice. I don't know who chose this book for us to read together as a class, but it was a book written by, I believe, a Black author. I hope they were Black. And it was just about Africa and the future and actually everything like all these the Europe and Americas and everything like that, there's been some sort of collapse or anything, and Africa is actually the metropolis of the world, and they have their shit together, and everything is run very well. And I think introducing that concept to 10 or 11-year-old kids, kind of like, oh well, this is interesting, and it had a really compelling story. That's not even what it was about. It was about a kid going through something and navigating this world. But it did illustrate this idea about Africa being number one. I'm like, that is really, really cool. And it's stayed with me all these years.
I think Carson's got a big red button that, like, just emergency stop. And he's had Jimmy Savile, he's had the word paedophile, colonialism. Third one's like, every time his fingers hovering over that emergency.
It's been fun on YouTube, everyone. Thank you for joining us, I guess, this last episode. I do like this political drama we've fully come up with. That sounds incredible. And I do like the idea that 28 days later, or 28 years later, part 3 is just going to be the small scale, talking about the politics of Africa and just completely get away from zombies and everything. No, Jim is going to go to Morocco and then they're going to find out all this. That's, I pray that's the direction to go in, like The Big Short, but with just in this world. I agree with you, Jack, where I was genuinely quite mid on the film and feeling just meh about it going into this conversation. But I'm quite hyped up about it. During this conversation, I will say I've purchased tickets to see it again this week. So wow. I'm very, very excited to see it a second time. I'm definitely, especially with, I think, this context, I think talking to someone who understands more of the context here, very, very, more engaged by it, I would say. And I'm excited to see it again. Still very fascinated about this trilogy. I would say probably out of every trilogy or every franchise currently happening, this is probably the one I'm most interested in, just in I don't know what it's going to be. But certainly I think this is a strong start. Definitely a lot more here than I think maybe will catch audiences' eyes on a first go around. I definitely was at a 2.5 or a 3 originally, definitely up to a 3.5 with a rewatch, maybe a 4, if not higher. I think there's actually probably a lot here, but also a lot of that depends on the payoff that we will get over the next couple years. Hillary, I know you were also kind of middle of the road on this. Are you higher, or are you still kind of where you were at?
I'm staying where I'm at. I mean, I didn't hate the film. I'm very middle of the road. I'm right in the middle. But I think it's just because I've had some of these experiences as far as podcasting just in general. And I apologize, of course, I forgot that these are uploaded to YouTube. So you do need to kind of watch your language. But very often, the conversations do outweigh the experience of the films. And that's been happening, I think, more lately, not only on this show, but other Clapper related podcasts that I've appeared on, where it's this conversation is great, but the movie, is its own thing. Thank goodness for the conversation, So I'm kind of staying where I'm at, but I want to be clear. I didn't hate the film. That having a really strong feeling about it one way or the other, I think is not on the cards for me, but I am curious, just like the two of you, about where this is ultimately going to go. But I mean, I'm just totally loving this idea of the cutaway. I'm really stuck on it right now. I heard I didn't watch it's the White Lotus, right? But I heard a comedian make a joke about it. It's wouldn't it be funny if they just threw a family where everything was perfectly normal? There's all this drama, and then it just cuts to this one family. It's we saw dolphins today, and they're just happy. That would just cutting through all of that tragedy and just fucked upness and all that sort of stuff with it's by the way, there are people out there somewhere, and it's it's probably a lot better or fine. So but that won't happen. That's just going to exist in my head, and I'm really enjoying that right now. It's just cutting to other places, and it's people doing laundry and having a good time, having birthday parties and stuff. Life goes on, and hopefully in places that you wouldn't expect. For me, that's the comedy.
Great. Well, I think that's going to do it for our review of 28 Years Later. You can find it currently, if you've not seen the film, thank you for joining us on this journey, I guess. We kind of spoil it for you, but you can see it in theaters if you wish. Let's go to our question of the week, very directly tied into it. What is your favorite Danny Boyle film? Hillary, what of his filmography has stood out to you the most?
The one I wanted to mention more than anything else is a film I don't really think got as much attention as I think it deserved, which is Trainspotting 2. It's the best.
Wow, great
It's one of the
choice.
best sequels I've ever seen. I think it's probably the best sequel I've seen to anything in my entire
Wow.
lifetime. It just really, it was its own thing, but also did justice and seemed deeply tied to the first film. I can't say like Train Spotting is the most important one to me, but it was the most formative one. It was one that, you had to see when you were young. Um, and I bet it's still a film that kids like watch at some point or another because it just has that kind of like cinephile street cred, like Mulholland Drive or other films that are considered old now but still have meaning for young people. And the other one I watched a lot, although it's like one of his much weaker ones, is A Life Less Ordinary. There's just some scenes in there that are absolutely hilarious. Honestly, if you can, just look up the scene where Ewan McGregor's forced to dig his own grave. It's so pathetically funny. We never got tired of watching that, and a pretty good soundtrack too. But overall, I would say Train Spotting 2 is probably the strongest one where I was like, man, he really exceeded expectations there. So maybe 28 years later, part 3 will be like that. We'll see. I mean, that'd be amazing.
We'll definitely get there. I mean, I'm excited. Everyone better be back in January for the next one, and then whenever part 3, we'll be here. Um, yeah. I'm going to be kind of boring considering the conversation we've had today. 28 days later, I think is like fantastic, especially on a rewatch. I always liked it because it's like obviously it's very horrifying. The visual style is like phenomenal. The digital cinematography and everything, fantastic. The meaning given to the rage virus in that scene with the monkeys that you mentioned, or I believe apes that you mentioned, Hillary, especially now when we see how politicized social media has gotten, how that has waged social wars and just how it's affected our society, just so much meaning in that it like continues to just grow more and more. It's one of those rare films that presents an idea and then it just gets so much richer 20 years after it's made, almost to where you're like, well, what were you even trying to go for 20 years ago? Because this is so clearly a statement that feels like it was so crafted for this modern moment, way ahead of its time, and just a super good film. Like I really, especially again on a rewatch, enjoy 28 Days Later quite a bit. Jack, what is your favorite Danny Boyle film?
Oh, this is really tough, actually, on retrospect. Like, really tough. Because it's interesting Hillary mentioned T2, because Transport 2, because I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago when we did sequels on Mission Impossible episode. I think that's like impeccable. That film like understands nostalgia, and that you can't escape your fate. And this film, especially about England as well, how it's gone to the dogs, and I think this film's extraordinary how it does it. Again, like you said, 28 Days Later's a great one. I'll probably go for 2 underrated ones because I was going to mention like Sunshine, but I think that's pretty much well established. I've always thought that Trance was quite interesting that he did. I think Shallow Grave is probably his best film. I think it's outstanding. Like as a debut, I don't think he gets never really got the credit for that either. I think there's a lot to say about society, a lot about friendship and the way the world's going. But I'm going to go for a bit of a strange one here. I think his direction of the London opening ceremony in 2012 is poetic to a point where I think it defined what it meant to be British all those years ago, in a celebration of how we've gone through time and what it meant to be a part of something, about how something has grown to this point, which is ironically something that he's gone through his whole career about British culture, and 28 years later is amplified to a degree about post-Brexit. I think when you look at that film and look at this, what we're talking about today, and the sake of 13 years, is quite frightening. And granted, one is a heightened level of genre and violence and zombies and stuff like that, but the sentiment is very much rings true about a land that's forgetting the people who brought it up. The people who are here now are also a part of that, regardless of race, creed, and colour. And I think to celebrate all things British culture, be it the Queen, I know this gets like quite royalist, or James Bond and Paddington, the steel mills, the Industrial Revolution, even aspects to the BBC, Mr. Bean, the Arctic Monkeys and Queen and stuff like that. I think there's a Chariots of Fire is also there. There's just something to be like to take that on, and also to decline an MBE for that as well. I think it's something that he doesn't really get credit for. It's a part of his duty as a filmmaker. Terrific, outstanding. If anyone wants 3 hours, I know, Carson, you've watched a bit of the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. Like, you watched one in Japan, didn't you, not so long ago? But I would recommend the opening ceremony. Extraordinary. I know Spielberg had something to do with Beijing, which I don't know why you would want to do that aside from a paycheck. But the nationalist that Danny Boyle is, that's my favourite. Although I know that's a bit of a left field one, but I'd say that or Shallow Grave.
Better than like Hans Zimmer making the new national anthem for Saudi Arabia or whatever it is.
That's like, gonna come back, isn't it? I'm sure. That's
everyone makes choices for the paycheck, and that is what it is. Isn't it? With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll start because I just have one film I want to talk about. Hopefully this is not too controversial on top of what this episode's already discussed, but I watched Ed Wood's Glen or Glenda.
Oh, wow.
For the first time, and I was really blown away by the film, to be honest. It is obviously in a lot of ways, in a lot of the language, a lot of the projection, very, very dated. It's an informational film made in like the 1950s, right? 1953 to be precise. So in the middle of the Hays Code, like a very, very controlled projection on people who cross-dress and trans individuals. And it's a horrifying prospect in a lot of ways that this film was made. It's like, oh my gosh, it sounds like it's going to be awful. And it is dated in quite a few ways, but ultimately a film that is so dedicated to like building empathy. It is so radical. It's a film that directly looks at the audience and is like, it doesn't matter if you agree or not. It doesn't matter like what you think. These people deserve respect and they're not hurting anybody. It is very campy. It is very fun. Like, this is a really, I thought, kind of spectacular production to where, like, yes, again, you have to deal with that social context. And I'm not a voice who necessarily is here to like, grant it full immunity or anything. But I had a great time with it. I was really just like shocked that this was made in the 1950s. Also thinking about like, if this went to anyone else, because this is also Ed Wood reflecting on his personal life. He himself cross-dressed. He's understanding and that relationship and that identity. And also dealing with like projecting all of his shame onto the screen in a really meaningful way. If it would have fallen onto anyone else's hands, this would have been just pure venom and toxic and horribleness. And instead, I think you get a pretty radical feature that even now, like I was thinking, like, imagine J.K. Rowling watched this now. She would have had a heart attack thinking like, why is this thing so woke and progressive? Pretty insane. So I actually really recommend that, especially for audiences looking at kind of older queer texts. Definitely a fascinating project to watch and break down. Hillary, what have you seen recently?
I've seen three things I want to bring up, but I just want to second what Carson is saying. I did see Glen and Glenda a few years ago, and I had a similar response where I thought, wow, this is actually very sympathetic and kind of sweet, considering how much vitriol has been hurled at the community, the trans community, or I'd say like even the cross-dressing community. You mean like whether you're a straight guy who likes to dress up, whatever your thing is, like, who cares? Anyway, so the three that I'm going to mention, one is Hobson's Choice. This was a recommendation from Sarah. He was in the Criterion Closet and he brought out Hobson's Choice, and I can't even remember what he said, but I wrote it down. And I just love, there's kind of like a late bloomer love story at the center of this film. It does really seem to be Charles Laughton's movie from he's on the poster. He's the first built person. So you very much think, oh, this is just going to be about him being a tyrant. But no, there's like this fledgling love story that I don't want to talk about very much, but just start watching it and you will be richly rewarded. The other one I wanted to highlight was another film from 1937 called They Won't Forget. It's directed by Mervyn LeRoy, who I believe was more of a producer than a director. It's very much of the time. It's not addressed in the film, but it's based on a real case that quickly spun out of control. There was anti-Semitism involved. It makes you hate the press. It makes you hate the public, and especially in the particular times we live in. We've already referenced social media and the vitriol that people have toward each other. this is a reminder that it's always existed. It was just on a different level, and it can result in some very disastrous consequences. And then the last one I wanted to bring up is a film I found out by chance called Hell's a Poppin'. And it came out in 1941, and I watched it, and there's nothing to describe this experience. It's one of the most out there, strange films I've ever seen. I have friends who are potheads, and I've actually thought about approaching this like, I want you to smoke a ton of weed and then watch this with me, because you will not believe what you're seeing. It's like, I theorize that it's like if you took like a bunch of you smoked a bunch of weed and you did a bunch of cocaine. That's what this film is, and it came out in 1941, and it's a musical. It's just, there's nothing like it. I can't wait to watch it again. So those are my 3 recommendations. Oldies but goodies. I found some gems in there.
A great list. Jack, what have you seen recently?
Very little. I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been prepping for a podcast with Nick on his show. So I'll be very brief. I don't really have a lot. There's one that I was going to talk about. I don't know if it's really relevant, but I will do anyway. I watched Roadhouse, the Jake Gyllenhaal thing. I watched it with my down at my family's house, just like in the background, and it was like comfort food. I hadn't watched a film for a while, just because I feel like I'm a bit burnt out, and obviously in Pride Month as well, I've been watching a lot of Pride stuff, and it seems to be like a lot of like dark oriented stuff with Pride Month, and I'm trying to get away from that more like celebration and stuff, but it always leads back to like just really like tough stuff to watch. But not that I mean, it's a first world problem, at my own, but I was like, I'll just put Roadhouse on for a palate cleanser, and I enjoyed it. I'm interested in what they do with the sequel. I have watched Cloud Atlas for an unrelated project I'm doing with Nick. I watched it the other day. I've got an open map version I'm going to watch as well. I haven't watched it in years. I was like, oh my god, like what films used to be like, question things, and just had something about them. God, it's just an era, bygone era. I watched Juggernaut, a Richard Lester film for Uncut Gems. I was ill, I couldn't attend, but I watched it anyway. That was really flat, boring, and uninspired, although there's sort of like something to be found in it, but it was just a very strange James Bond light disaster film that isn't really James Bond and really isn't a disaster film, but it was okay. And 2 other things as well. I watched the original 28 Days Later before this. I cannot believe you actually got me to watch that again. It was fucking frightening. I was like, Jesus. There's the sequence where like he goes to see his parents who are dead.
Oh, yeah.
Spoiler, like not only is that traumatizing, like, but as a kid you don't really get it. And then when he goes down and Selena and Mark are asleep and he lights the candle and someone breaks through the window, has like genuinely scarred me for the rest of my life. Like that in very darkly lit rooms with light coming through the window, and with blinds on. No, can't do it. It makes me feel sick. And then last but not least, I watched The Offer, the 10-hour miniseries about the Al Ruddy's experience of making The Godfather, and I really enjoyed it. I've got some others well aware of how it was made and Coppola and stuff, but I'd been reading a lot about Robert Evans. I mentioned this to Hillary on a podcast before when we were on about McCabe and Mrs. Miller, about Robert Evans and stuff, and like Matthew Good in it, who also played Ozymandias in The Watchmen, like has got to be the most underrated actor working today. Like he's also in Stoker, fabulous performer. He's like a chameleon. He's outstanding. A good old British actor as well. I thought he was impeccable as Robert Evans, but I also think Miles Teller was good. I thought Dan Foley, who played Coppola, was good, and it was a good experience. Interesting that obviously behind the scenes they had issue with COVID and certain people refused to take the jab, and it was just an interesting one to read up about the production of that, about the production of something else, which is fascinating. And then last but not least, for any gangster Guy Ritchie fans out there, I watched Mobland in like 2 days. I've been very ill. So my dad was like, just watch Mobland, it's on Paramount Plus. I was like, oh. He's like, oh, you can borrow a login. I was like, well, thank you. Like, can I pay for your Prime? Amazon Prime, you can at least let me borrow it. And I watched it in 2 days. Guy Ritchie's a strange one, because my review of Phantom Youth's going to come out in the next few days. I'm like, well, I didn't really like it. And you can read the review for more. But I thought Mobland was like fun, but it's interesting strangely, like 28 years later, is that for some reason now we can't seem to have a film or a TV show that can come out and be definitive. There's got to be a tease or a setup for something else, and I think Hollywood is so scared, or producers are so scared about not being able to have one thing and then not have another and another. Like The Last of Us 2 being split up into like three seasons. The Last of Us being split into 3 seasons. There's 2 games. It's like you've just got to let it lie. You just make the product, and I think some projects probably deserve going back again, and some others don't get that. But I think if people started to just make a singular product and then audiences wanted more of it, there'd probably be a lot of less chance of fucking that second season up, in the fact that fans want it and you can create it that way, and not just make something and then be like, well, we don't have money to make this now. That's probably why Hollywood's in the States. And excuse me, but I watched Mobland. It was good. It's not like a lot of people's cup of tea, but it's very Guy Ritchie, and it's very much. I'll say this: if you like the Gentleman, it's not going to be your cup of tea. But if you like something like a bit more straightforward, a bit more on the nose, Mobland will do your thing. But I thought Tom Hardy, not to be so facetious here, but God, he looked old in it as well. He looked haggard in Mobland. Because my mum was like, "Oh, we want to watch." I know I'm going on here, apologise, but they watched. She was like, "Oh, we wanted to watch Venom afterwards." I'm like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, we just in a Tom Hardy movie. We wanted to watch Venom, so we watched all 3." And I caught the first 10 minutes of the first film in 2018. Not now, like not in 2018, like now. And he looks like 15 years younger. So I don't know what's going on there, but fair play to him. But that's all I've seen. That's my comment about the state of Tom Hardy and Mobland. But no, thank you very much for having me on, Carson. I was not looking forward to this for the horror reasons, but you and Hillary have made my day. And, I'm gonna plop this with a 5-star rating. I thought it was that good, so I can't wait. I think I'm reviewing it for the site as well, so I'll put more political reasonings in that and mention Jimmy Savile there as well. But thank you very much for having me. It's always nice to talk about some movies, to really dissect it, to get really into the meat and bones.
Absolute cinema. No, I thought it was a great conversation. So thank you both for joining. Thank you everyone at home for listening and watching the podcast, obviously. The same week, Hillary, we have an episode coming out celebrating Midsummer. We're reviewing Midsommar, Ari Aster's film. I thought it was a great conversation, so I hope everyone checks that out. This month we've had a couple Pride specials. Myself and Jakob reviewed The Living End, specifically on our Patreon. I thought that was a great conversation, so highly recommend. And then we'll be back next time because we're going back to the theater. Gareth Edwards, Jurassic World Rebirth. I have thoughts on what I assume that film's going to be, but we will definitely get there in the next episode. For now, let's find where we can find everybody online. Jack, where can we find you?
You can find me with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp, which is my name on Twitter, X, and Letterboxd and Clapper. A few reviews, Fountain of Youth, Final Destination Bloodlines, which I didn't talk about, but that's my review on there. Alto Nights, probably this, and a few others. And yeah, can't
you didn't
wait.
Like Final Destination?
Yeah, I did. I watched it. Yeah, of course, I picked a review for it. I've got a lot of stuff to say about that. I don't know what people are watching there, but it wasn't the thing that I watched. But anyway, maybe my palette of horror has drastically changed from post-Brexit British oriented terror. I don't know, but maybe I've just changed. But no, you can find my username on there. And again, I love to speak to you and Hillary. I always love these conversations Sunday night. They're always like a nice cap for my weekend. So thank you both for indulging me talking politics and absolute gibberish for almost 2 hours. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Hillary, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Letterboxd under the name Degelle, Degell. Sorry, Degelle. And if you go there is a link to a link tree, or you can just type it into your browser. It's campsite.bio/Degelle, what I just spelled quite clumsily. And that'll take you to pretty much everything on the internet, from, things I'm making to, the music I'm listening to, the books I'm reading, all of that fun stuff. I'm working today on some editing projects that will show up on my blog, hopefully within the next few days. That's been fun. I'm basically rescoring a silent film and then translating intertitles to another. They would be a pretty weird double feature, but that's what I'm doing for June. So find me there and hopefully enjoy what you see.
Great. And you can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Though really, Letterboxd is the only place I'm super active online as far as social media. Thank you so much for listening and watching again, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.